Hi, Kat here for Lightwave Digital. In this video, we're going to have a little bit of a tour of the new RIPR render engine that is available in Lightwave 2025. So here I've got a blank scene just to start off with, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually show you the RIPR interface here, and then I'm going to pull something into the software. So through the drop-down window in either any perspective view or camera, you can see a list that comes after the primary OpenGL display modes, which features VPR, RIPR, which is new, and of course Service Preview. So with RIPR engaged, which we have now, I'm going to open the gearbox, and we can see some options in here. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to go and take a quick gander at the Environment tab, and I want to change this HDRI image from the default one to one that I think is a little bit better to look at. So we're going to go with this Shadowplat 16K, very, very large HDRI. And to get it to update, generally, you need to tap through the interface on the time bar, and we can see that we've got now a HDRI in the background. Let's go to our camera properties and set this up for 1920 by 1080 or whatever is a suitable resolution. Keep in mind, though, that because this is a GPU-based renderer, that the resolution that you're going to be working at has an impact on speed. However, there's some tools in here that will help things out. Now, before we go on to that, let's talk a little bit about what's going on in the Environment tab itself. We have an HDRI intensity value, which we can crank over. Again, I'm just going to use the left and right arrow keys, change the intensity. Now, that's not going to change the value of the background. We need some objects in here first before it'll make an impact. However, we do have a rotation degree function. So if we want to rotate that 90 degrees, or if we want to do auto rotate, we hit counterclockwise, and we can see that the HDRI will spin once for us. Depending which direction we want. So it'll give us a nice little view. And we can hit stop, of course. And I'm going to set this to 180 because that was a really good view that I had before. Maybe 90. There we go. Minus 90. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, minus 120. There, something like this. Okay, so now that I've got something like that in there, let's go on to the camera tab and take a look at what we can do with the aperture, which will give us a depth of field effect, very similar to what we'd have in depth of field here. But this is completely unlinked at this time between the camera and the RIPR interface. So you'll notice that there are no T's or envelope controls here just yet. Hopefully we'll get that in very near future, or just be able to link to Lightwave's camera and then specify which camera we want to link to, or just use it as a global but still be fed from one of the primary cameras. So let's play with the aperture size. Okay, we can tell right off the bat that an aperture of 1 really blurs out this background. So let's start cranking this down. We get a real-time depth of field. Now, keep in mind that an HDRI in this sense is essentially infinite in terms of where it is background. So any value is really going to cause it to bleed out a little bit. And you can see that it refines. And once it does refine, though, we can scrub through, and once we release the playhead, we get an instantaneous update. We've got some other additional options here. We'll get into these in another video, though. If we take our playback, we can see that we've got some playback, we've got screen grabbing, and we've got some folders for where we want our input folder for the playback and our screen grab folder. So I'm going to designate this. Keep in mind right now that RIPR does not remember in the Lightwave scene file when you save this where your screen grabs are going to go. So if you need to set this up again after you closed or opened the scene or changed the scene, it's something you need to set. So input folder is basically for video material that you want to put in the background. Okay, then we've got preview modes. So we've got a couple different preview modes, and they're driven based off of how much GPU and capabilities of memory you've got. So just having this GPU working with the HDRI in the background, we're consuming almost 5 gigs of GPU memory. GPU memory total is 16.4 gigs. This is a RTX 4060 Ti graphics card that I'm working with right now. So not a super hardcore, doomsday end all be all card, but not totally a schluff in terms of its capabilities. It does have 16 gigs, and it is a TI. However, it has a slower memory bus speed than, say, the 3080s or the 3090s, the 40X series that are not the 4060, and of course, then the 5090s or 5080s if you want to get into those class of cards, which are kind of difficult to get at the time of this recording, but they certainly do have a lot more memory bandwidth. Now, let's talk about what preview render scale means. So basically, this is a multiplier of whatever your resolution is. So if you're running at this screen resolution, which in my case is 1920 by 1080 monitor, and we've got this much going on for it, you've got essentially the memory being consumed based off of this multiplier. So while it may be tempting in preview mode to crank this up to see the highest quality that you can get, you'll quickly find that you can easily exceed the target amount. So it's going to revert back to something that it can handle. And by default right now, it just goes to 1. It's not super intelligent, but we can get away with like 3x if we wanted to. I don't really need to do that because we're just going to take a look at some stuff just in preview mode, and then we'll get into render mode. So in order to get into render mode, we'll need something pretty to look at. So in this case, we're going to go and do a load items from scene. And we're going to grab this one here, which I set up earlier. And I'm going to grab all my objects, all my lights, just in case I do want to render this in the conventional renderer. And I'm also going to grab my camera. Okay, and one last thing, see if there's any additional plugins here. Don't need any of that, so we're good. So we hit OK, and right off the bat, we're going to be loading in a version of the Galactica that I built on season 2 almost 20 years ago, for use on episodes from 203 to 209, more or less. Now, originally I had this with a lot of set dressing inside of one of the flight pods, and it was a little bit difficult for RIPR to deal with because it was dealing with some MDD deformations and a few other things that it can't handle just right now, so it didn't really work out very well. However, once I removed those things, it came in very nicely. And we can see our Galactica object back here. I'm going to go back to the camera and turn this aperture off so we can see it in focus. And we can see that the object is being updated with all that goodness. Because effectively what's happening underneath the hood here is that RIPR is a path tracer. GPU render engine type, very similar in respects to the path tracers that you would find in Emergen and some of the similar technology in Octane, based on the same concepts. And in order for it to do this, it has to convert this model into a format called GTLF. That is specifically intended for web use. However, it's very, very handy for working inside of a path tracer, because a lot of these WebGL or web-enabled online rendering solutions are driven through path tracers, because they'll use the graphics card on your system to render this stuff out, and they'll use very, very low poly GTLF files and generate what you need there. Now, we can see that this doesn't look too hot, and I'm going to just scrub through the timeline here so we can see things coming towards camera. This was originally done as an animation of 240 frames, so we'll go to 240 frames. All right. Now, so this is all happening in real time. This is not an OpenGL display. This is the path tracer at work. And we can increase the quality of how this looks, and look very closely at the geometry here. You can see that it gets more refined. Now, you also notice that this object has color on it for sure, based off of the surface colors of the materials, but there isn't much in the way of texture maps available to RIPR right now. However, that's being improved. We should expect full texture map support and bump mapping and normal mapping very shortly. But in the meantime, this is what we're going to be working with. It still has its uses. Now, this preview renderer has nothing to do in terms of like the quality that you can get out of it during a full-blown render, and we're going to demonstrate that in a second. But we can see that this is giving us pretty accurate lighting results based off of the HDRI. And if we improve the render passes for this, we can get even better results. Now you can go up to, I believe, 1,000, but this could get really scary going anywhere past 100 depending on your card. But you can see that the quality improvement stops working once you hit a limit. So we need to be careful with this type of thing. Let's go back down to 25. Let's go maybe to 30. Gets a little bit better. And most certainly does respond in real time. Now, cool thing about this is that the HDRI playback is extremely fast. This has some potential to do some really great things in the future because of this capability. So full-blown background plates, HDRIs, because this is 16K in resolution. It's actually a reasonably sized HDRI by today's standards, but it works very well and it's very quick. Keep in mind the screen recording software is likely causing a little bit of interference here, as that is done on the GPU, but it works very well. Now, for those of you who are a little bit more technical, it may be useful for you to not just look at the information being displayed for GPU memory, but also going over to performance and checking out the GPU performance. Okay. So we got 5.6 gigs consumed, roughly about that. Now let's see if we can get some performance updates. Unfortunately, I'm having to pull the monitor off to the side, but you can see the spike here. And in general, just how the performance is impacted when I did that scrub through. But we can see that it's so fast that the card literally doesn't have enough time to go to 100% consumption of the capabilities of the card before it's already done the task and it falls off. So RIPR can be thrown quite a bit of stuff as long as it will fit into memory. And there is that memory limitation there that works against us. Unlike the conventional CPU renderer, which in my opinion, CPU renderers have a better method of handling memory than GPU ones in these types of situations where you might have a low memory environment based off of what you're doing in the scene. And if you push a GPU renderer too far, your card runs out of memory, and then things start to get really funky with either the application or the OS. And RIPR isn't any different than that. Again, it's still early days for this tool, but it's still very usable in a lot of sense. But we don't get color textures right now. We don't get bump mapping. We don't get normals. But that is totally something that I can support in the future. It's not something that's way off in the distance. It is on the roadmap for RIPR. So let's take a look at what we do for rendering here. We need to choose an output folder. So we'll go and do that. Okay. I'm going to go and make a BSG. We'll try 50 and 50. So 50 passes, 50 bounces. Okay. And I'm going to set this to 50 passes and 50 bounces. And we're not going to use a timestamp subfolder. I don't like that idea, but whatever. We've got something in here now that I can go and create a render for. So let's hit render, and it'll start cranking through it right away. Now, don't get too concerned about what it looks like here. We're concerned about what it looks like in the actual final images. So this is going to export to EXRs for me. And at this time, what I'll do is I'll go open and fetch those EXRs in Fusion. Let's go into the background. Okay. So this is going in a pretty good clip. Now remember, this is 50 times 50. So pretty good intense amount of math going on here. Plus, it's doing a basic preview throw of the results to the interface. Now, it stopped at 120. Reason for that is quite simply, rather than grabbing from the preview range, it's grabbed from the render range. So if we want to go to 240, we can. And we can just hit render again, and it'll go through it. Take a look at what that's looking like in the background in Fusion for the exported DXRs. Okay, so just rearrangement of my keyboard here for a second, and let's go and see what we got. So there's our 50 by 50 bounce folder. It only went to 120 there, but let's take a look at what the results were from that original pass. So let's go here and take a peek. Now, because they're EXRs and I'm working in a linear color space, I got to make an adjustment here. So we'll go and add a gamut tool. Color gamut. There we go. Okay. And source space is no change. And our output space, we need to change it to sRGB bump. Take a look at it, and then we're back to what we should be seeing. So looking through this, and while that's still going in the background, I can scrub through this. Looks pretty good. It's responding accurately to the lighting conditions. And we get a beautiful, although kind of preview style render out of this very easily. Now, you're probably asking yourself, well, until that other stuff gets in there, like these full texture map and additional support, well, what's the purpose of RIPR? Well, right now, it's a fantastic way to get something better than an OpenGL preview out, because years ago, when 2015 merged over to 2018, we lost a function in Lightwave, which was very handy for doing previs, called quick shade mode. This is our new quick shade mode for the time being. However, as RIPR advances, and because we're able to crank these things out with better lighting, you'll find that if you're using AI to do things like video to video conversions, RIPR will provide really excellent source material for those AI generative tools to convert what you've got here in some sense to something that's more enhanced, using something that has accurate lighting on it but doesn't necessarily have all the textures all over it. Probably will let the AI come up with the textures on it in a better sense and pump out something really nice. So even reducing this object to just a simple clay or gray shade model or surface set would be fantastic for an AI generative video to video rendering solution or creation solution. Very popular in previs right now, especially with Lightwave artists in LA. And you'll be able to punch stuff out that looks great very quickly that isn't, OpenGL texture shaded solid. See where we are with this render. Okay, so it's done. So which folder did it go to? Yeah, 50/50 mounts. Did it stop at 120 again? Yeah, it did. Why did it stop at 120? Because I probably didn't hit enter. So render properties again. Oh, there it is. I may need to save this first. So that's one drawback there. So again, early days for the tool. There are some quirks, but you can see just how easy it is to set something up and get it to go. If you have been texturing your model while working on your scene and you engage RIPR, it's likely that none of those textures and even parts of the model are not going to appear until you save it, reload it, because the RIPR software right now reads based off of what the models are on load and their current state with those textures that are at load stage. So always remember that you should probably close your scene, load it back up after you made all your changes, and then engage RIPR for a final output. This isn't a version of VPR. It has a very specific purpose, and while you can do animation with it, the idea behind it is that once you have your animation done, you render that out. You're not going to be in here doing texture changes and a bunch of lighting changes, at least for now, until you're ready to go, and then you can crank it out. Let's go past 120, see if it takes it this time. There we go. So now it'll go all the way to 240. Almost there. Go bounce over to Fusion again. Well, actually, while that's cooking, we can see the GPU utilization. So there's a dedicated memory usage at 1920 by 1080. And then there's the actual percentage of the GPU that's being consumed. Now remember, this is going to be very low in most scenes. My guess is at this moment, the GPU basically hits a certain point, finishes its duties, then moves on. With more stuff in the scene, possibly more items or entities, it might hit a little bit higher. So you can go up to 39, 40%. There, it's done. Render's complete. Let's go and take a look here. So don't be too concerned if it's not optimized and using everything that's possibly on your card just yet. There are conditions here that we've got in play where it's like, hey, you are rendering this stuff out and it's already so quick that it moves on and it just can't reach full capacity by the time it's finished doing that stuff. So let's take a look here. And now we've got 240 frames. Rock and roll. Yes, we're going to expand that. Thank you. Make sure that's in there. Bump, bump. And now we've got it flying by camera. So you can see it's got very, very nice shading in there using that HDRI. And I can bang out a really nice previs bit like this and go and feed this over to an AI or put this into a cut, send it to my producer, director, whoever it is that's looking at visual effects shots that doesn't necessarily understand what they're looking at with OpenGL wireframes, and I don't have time to render something out over the network or even in VPR to get them something that looks somewhat like it should be in the environment. This is what RIPR is for, and it's only going to improve over time. So thank you for watching this video. There's going to be more of these in the future on RIPR as it progresses. So stay tuned and watch the evolution of this tool in Lightwave 3D.